All right, thank you all for coming out. Thank you very much for being here. I am John Rash. I work at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture and the Southern Documentary Project as a filmmaker and a professor in cinema studies and Southern studies. And I'm happy to welcome you all here tonight for this very special celebration of Larry Brown and the film that Gary Hawkins made about Larry Brown, The Rough South of Larry Brown. I want to talk to you a little bit about why we're here tonight. I know that Larry Brown's birthday was just about 3 days ago, and that in and of itself would have been enough of a reason to have a celebration like this. But the greater reason is that this film, several years ago, was actually during the pandemic, 2020. I had a good friend of mine, I'm originally from North Carolina, reached out to me and said, "You live in Oxford, Mississippi. That's where Larry Brown was from." I love Larry Brown. And she had fallen in love with Southern literature since we had met in high school many years ago, and said, "I've heard there's a documentary about Larry that I can't find anywhere." And I said, when I moved here, I saw that documentary on a DVD at Square Books. I'll go buy it and send it to you. And of course I went over there, and the one dusty copy that was still there by the time I made my way to Oxford had sold years before and was no longer there. And I said, well, I'll go to the library and check it out, and I'll rip it and I'll email it to you. And the copy that existed at the library for public rental had been stolen. So in all places in the world where you should be able to see the film about Larry Brown, you could not see it in Oxford, Mississippi. It was nowhere to be found. So I knew Gary Hawkins from the time that I studied at Duke University as an MFA student, and I emailed Gary and I said, "Gary, I would really like to receive a copy of your film somehow." And we were exchanging emails, and Gary graciously said, "Well, that film really needs to be in Oxford." So we started to talk about what it might look like to have the film come back to the archives here and live at the university forever. And Gary was generous enough to donate the film and a lot of behind-the-scenes material that he had stored away in a closet. And there's reasons why it's only the materials that he had stored away in his closet and not the original film footage that he preserved over these years that you'll hear about later. And that brought Greg Johnson into the conversation, who is the head of the Department of Special Collections and Archives at the University Library, who then shepherded us through the process of receiving Gary's materials. And that's why we're here tonight, to see the film and to hear this story about the importance of archive, the importance of Larry Brown's story, and why this homecoming really is a moment for us to celebrate and come together here. I met Tom Rankin at my time at Duke University, and I had actually heard about Larry Brown from a good friend of mine in North Carolina who was a fireman, who turned me on to Larry because he was a fan of Larry's books, because Larry was a fireman. And when I walked into Tom's office the first time, there was a poster on the wall of Larry Brown, actually the same poster as in the back room here, because it was for an event that happened at Proud Larry's. And I noticed that poster, and we talked a little bit about Larry Brown in Tom's time here in Oxford. So my connection to Larry Brown very much is through the folks that you see sitting here. Like, I'm not originally from Oxford, I'm from North Carolina, but somehow my connection to documentary filmmaking and studying the South leads through this connection of Larry Brown in a lot of ways. So thank you all for being here. I just wanted to set the stage and sort of explain to you who we are, why I'm here. I also want to thank Scott and Proud Larry's for hosting us here tonight. I want to thank the Center for the Study of Southern Culture for supporting this event and for receiving this archive and supporting my efforts to try to bring it here. And of course, I want to thank the university libraries and Greg Johnson and the Department of Archives and Special Collections for doing all of the great work that they do and really preserving this work in perpetuity from this point forward. So I want to introduce the folks that are here. I'm going to get through this really quickly. All these people have pages and pages of biographies that I could read to you, so I've boiled it down to hopefully the essentials, just so you know who you're going to hear from. Our moderator is Greg Johnson. As you heard, he's the head of the Department of Special Collections and Archives, a professor, and the Blues Archivist at the University of Mississippi. Tom Rankin is a renowned photographer who focuses his work on the American South as professor of practice of art history, and visual arts, and the chair of the MFA in experimental and documentary art at Duke University. Tom was a friend to Larry and continues to celebrate him and his work through images that he captured of Larry here in Mississippi. And of course, Gary Hawkins was born and raised on a farm in Trinity, North Carolina, currently teaches screenwriting and nonfiction filmmaking, also in North Carolina at Duke University. In 1989, Gary debuted The Rough South of Harry Crews on UNC TV, which went on to win several awards, including an Emmy. His next installment in the Rough South series was the film that we're seeing tonight about Larry Brown, The Rough South of Larry Brown. The film won several awards and was cited by the Oxford American as an essential Southern documentary. More recently, Hawkins wrote the screenplay for another Larry Brown novel, Joe, which starred Nicolas Cage, and as I described earlier, was the shepherd and the protector of the materials that he donated to the university, and it's graciously made his way back here to Oxford tonight to talk about his experience making this film and about the archive. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Greg from that point forward.
Thanks so much, John. So from mountains of rejection letters to a story getting printed in Easy Riders magazine, it was plant growing problems, that's a fun one, to breaking into the literary world with Boy and Dog, to his works ultimately being adapted to the big screen. Big Bad Love, Joe, as we just heard. Larry Brown's arc as a writer is one of determination and perseverance. How many of us in this room have given up on something after we received one rejection? Anyone? No, y'all are all perseverance people. Everybody's all right. Y'all are all amazing. Y'all are all Larry Brown disciples here, I see. Have you wanted to give up after getting rejections? I know I have. It's very demoralizing. You know, you're going to see in this film a little bit about some of the rejections Larry got from submitting his writings, but he didn't let that stop. There might have been times where he thought about letting that stop him, but he didn't. He kept on. Some folks like to romanticize creativity as something that just strikes you and you have it. You know, we all think about, like, you know, Mozart. He just wrote all these pieces, never revised anything. He wrote it down perfectly the first time, never edited that. That's false information about Mozart's life. But that's not the case for almost anyone. Larry Brown said there's no such thing as a born writer. He was always honing his skills as a writer. Looking through other literary collections that we house in archives and special collections, like William Faulkner's manuscripts, Willie Morris, Caroline Haynes, Barry Hannah, etc. We know he isn't alone. All of these writers wrote, deleted, edited, revised. It's just part of the process. And I know a lot of the English and creative writing instructors and professors here definitely trying to get their students to learn this skill. Don't just write something and then be done with it. You can always make it better. So through constantly bettering his writing, he kept his subject matter down home, you know, and connected with these southern landscapes that he knew so well, and with the very real themes of working class people trying to make ends meet, and poverty, and all of the violence that is sometimes associated with poverty. So we're not going to have an academic discussion about Larry Brown, and I don't think I need to get into a lot of biographical details on Larry Brown, because a lot of you are family and friends and have known Larry and know his works. So I want to ask Tom to say a few words of introduction to acknowledging some of the family members here before we get into our Q&A.
Sure. Thanks so much. And I will. It's so great to be at Proud Larry's. It was not named for Larry, but it should have been. Oh yes, it is. Maybe it is now. It should have just been Larry's. But anyway, I do that. You know, Larry. The only thing he cared about more than his books, his writing, and his books lasting, would be family and family lasting. And if Larry could be here and see however many family are here, that would give him immense pleasure beyond anything else. And I'm just going to try and risk leaving somebody out, but I ain't going to do it. But Miles and McLean, I'm just going to use. I'm not going to give you all introductions like Gary got. What's in your closet or anything. Sarah and Molly. The grandkids that Larry would be. I mean, it'd just go on and on. Jude, and of course, Paula and Billy Ray. He often said that Billy Ray was the greatest storyteller he ever knew. He never mentioned Faulkner in that sentence. Katie and Shane, he told me that Billy Ray always said that Shane was his favorite, and Billy Ray is making sure that Shane gets the balance of that for the rest of his life. Leanne and Will, and Paul Hipp is sitting here, who is probably as influential, and none of us, I was thinking in all seriousness, there should be a Paul Hipp film. Paul Hipp, Big Bad Love is dedicated to Paul Hipp. Paul Hipp probably gave Larry as much imagination, and it's just great to see Paul here. Harris, who is the bull rider, and Larry would be at every bull ride. There's nothing Larry was more interested in than competition and what could go wrong. He liked to say that he would sandbag. He'd load his characters down and see what could happen. Well, get on a bull, and that would be Larry's great narrative. And then, of course, there wouldn't be any Larry Brown books without Mary Annie Brown. You'll hear in the film, and she finds the first typewriter, which is not inconsequential to the equation. But more than that, I'm not going to try to say in this film, and Gary will probably talk about it. This film started out to be about Larry, and it's really about Mary Annie. It should be retitled. It's so great to see you all here. And if for no other reason to have this event is to get all of you all together. I don't want to keep going on, but I could.
Thank you. I mean, it's very important. We felt it very important to acknowledge the family. So we're glad you're here. I just want to say a quick few words about Larry Brown's collection in archives and special collections, and I want to say a few thank yous. Carly Herndon, she was a temporary staff person with us. She's now down at the DeGrumman Children's Library at the University of Southern Mississippi, but she did the bulk of the processing of this collection in terms of creating the finding aid for it, which is online now, so you can go find archives and special collections, find our finding aids, and you can see the contents of the entire contents of the collection listed there, and come by and see the collection. It's open for people to come view. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So we do have a couple of boxes of materials for special storage purposes. We have things in an off-site facility, certain audiovisual materials. You need to give us a couple days heads up on those, but everything else you can just show up and see. Jennifer Ford, my good friend and colleague in the department, also did a lot of processing of this collection, among others that have worked in the department over the years. So I wanted to thank them for all of their hard work processing this collection. It's a lot of boxes, a lot of materials, a lot of, when I was talking earlier about this process of revision and revising your works, and you can see that through these manuscripts. That's what's fascinating about these archival collections. Sometimes when we see a book, we just see the finished product, but through these manuscript collections, you can see like initial drafts of a book, sometimes written in some authors' cases on a napkin or just scribbling on the back of whatever they have at hand, and seeing all of their edits and remarks from editors and changes back and forth constantly, making the thing better into the final product that we all wind up buying at Square Books, hopefully, and reading. So come by and see that. So Tom, I want to ask you a question first. So some of the best Larry Brown photos I've seen were taken by you. You have a really good eye for him. And can you talk about how you first met him and your friendship and how maybe that informed some of your shot choices?
Yeah, I mean, we first met, but I was moving to Oxford, and I had read Facing the Music and moving into this house that had somebody renting Jimmy Ty, who's around town, was renting an apartment in the back, and he was drinking beer with some guy in the front yard when I pulled up in the pickup truck loaded down with stuff, and it was Larry. So we actually met first talking about what was in the truck before we even talked about literature or anything else, which has always struck me as the right way to meet anybody, but particularly Larry. And then I think he needed a portrait for one of his books, for an author portrait, and we became friends. And I don't know, I take pictures of things that I think are important, and I leave everything else alone. And it was pretty clear that our times and that Larry was something I wanted to take pictures of, and I often have a camera with me. And so there's those, I took many author pictures, but I also took pictures when we were doing things that we should or should not have been doing. And those are some of the, a wealthy set of photographs is, now or never. And I'm so glad that oftentimes I just took pictures of the most mundane things we were doing, hanging out. Later, our kids hung out together and families. And so they just sort of, the accretion and a lot of pictures don't matter until they matter. And that's also, I keep finding little pictures that I would never have printed if Larry were sitting here with us. That's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. Well, it's clear you had a really good friendship. I mean, when you see the collection, you'll see all these boxes of correspondence. Larry wrote, he was a voracious letter writer to all of his friends and to other authors, and there's a stack about that thick of correspondence between Larry and Tom here. So yeah, it's really a testament to your
Some of that should probably be restricted.
Yeah, you never know what somebody's what's gonna wind up in an archive one day. Gary, what was your introduction to Larry Brown?
Larry came to me through Algonquin Books, and how are y'all doing tonight? Y'all good? It's great to be here. And I hadn't been here in 20 years. Yeah, I was at Ajax, and I had lunch there. I had some catfish, and sorry, I have to tell this again. So I was leaving. The waitress said, "How was it?" And I said, "It was great. I hadn't been here in 20 years." She says, "Oh, well, I'm glad you did come back." And plus, I walked out and I came back in. I said, I didn't mean it that way, that I'd had a meal that bad. But it's amazing being here. I love it here. I kind of feel like I have a show to make. So it's strange being here without having to make a show. The story's too long to tell. I was basically handed Larry Brown by Algonquin Books. They said, "This is the guy you're looking for." I had ideas for the rough South, working class authors who teach themselves how to write, and then they write their own stories. That's all it was. And then you see a dramatization of one of their stories. That was the idea, just hit it quick, and you're out 60 minutes. So I'm going to tell a story on Mary Annie, since Tom brought it up. First time down here with my crew, Mary Annie cooked us a nice fried chicken dinner, and then she went away, and I didn't see her. And I interviewed Larry twice with my crew, went back to North Carolina, and it was good stuff, looked good. And I came back a second time a few months later to patch up some holes. Yeah, she knows what I'm going to say. At this point, Larry was writing all night. So he was up all night, and we didn't have anything to do during the day because we had to work at night. And Mary Annie was doing this kind of silent film star thing where she was being melodramatic, and she was like standing up quickly and walking out of the room. It was like a real passive aggressive. And I said, M.A., you don't want us here, do you? And she goes, oh, no, it's fine. It's like I said, but you really don't want us here. And she goes, no, it's not a problem. And we did that for 5 or 10 minutes, right? That game. And finally she said, well, I'll tell you, Gary, what it is. This writing thing, you think it's so glamorous? Well, I want to tell you, it is not. And so I said, put the camera on her. And Larry's taking a nap during this period. So she's in it was in the kitchen, right? Where she kind of lived. And so we put her at the counter, and she started spilling the beans. And then Larry woke up, and he came trudging in groggy, and he saw his wife on camera, and he was so, you remember he walked into the shot to start shoring up his side of the argument, and they started bickering, of course, and then it just got real clear. The show is about a marriage. It's not about just an author. It's about a marriage, and it just played out from there. Of course, that was like tackling something a lot bigger than I thought I was going to tackle. And just to say this, and I'll be beyond this. As we wrapped up the show, we premiered the show twice, and Larry was alive when we premiered it the first time. And I remember saying to them, assuming I outlive you two, whoever dies first, the other one I'm going to come back and see and film that person, and that'll be the end of the show because the marriage is over. And so that happened. Larry was talking, you'll see he's talking about I think he says, I have 20 more years of writing in me, and he really had 4 years left. Right. And so we came back and finished the show up that way.
Sounds like we need a continuation of the Rough South series.
Yeah. Well, it would have been Billy Ray's farm.
Yeah.
It was turning it.
Yeah. So I know music was very important to Larry Brown. I understand he often didn't really feel a day was complete without strumming the guitar a little bit before going to bed. And can both of you maybe talk about your knowledge of him and music and any relations with that, and specifically, if you could, Gary, if you could talk a little bit about the role of music in the film a little bit. And by the way, we heard as some of the slideshow was going, we did hear there was an unreleased Vic Chestnut song that was playing behind some of the slideshow earlier. So anyway, yeah, either one of you. Yeah, just talk about music and your.
Well, there was always a point in the night, if you're with Larry, where he would need to leave and go get his guitar. And I don't know why he didn't just keep it with him all the time, but and somebody was asking if there was going to be any music tonight, and if Larry were here, there would be. He would be like coming up right about now on the side and just waiting until there was a gap. So he really did. I think he once said, or maybe we said it to him, that he would have traded all his books, to be a musician. He really respected musicians. He loved to play music. He respected songwriters, and he wrote songs. And I think that in some ways, for him, they were one and the same. But it was a time at night when I think he could kind of unwind and get away from his characters. He talked about his characters like they lived with him, and so but there was never a time when he didn't want to have that guitar. I mean, he would take the guitar into City Grocery. He would take it anywhere. And whether you wanted it or not, Mary Annie often went home at that point, I think, in the evening. And Billy Ray, I mean, we could be here. We'd never see the film if we get Billy Ray up here, because y'all, it would need a film. I mean, nothing against Gary's film, but it would. So music was just, ran through everything. And if you rode in the, if you ride in the truck with Larry, I mean, he was so into music.
His best song was "Come Home, John Grisham." That was this. And he's
which is yet unreleased.
Yeah, very unreleased. He was a lefty, and I'm a lefty too. So one of the joys of interviewing Larry was I could come down and take the guitar off the wall and play it. It's a pure left.
His best song may have been "Don't Let the Door," which has the great line about a wife, take yourself out like last week's trash.
Could have been. But now the music in the show, Larry didn't do that.
No,
thank God. He didn't do that. It was just kind of cobbled together. I would like to tell one just real quick story about the music. I was fishing around, plugging different areas with music. I mean, I hope you like it. I don't know if it works or not, but I was into Steve Reich at the time. The minimalist composer. And I wanted that for Boy and Dog, that almost like a Psycho soundtrack, like the first Mad Max. And so I had that in my mind. My audio engineer was also a Juilliard cellist, so he threw together a string quartet, and we recorded the Reich. Now, I also saw a group called Trailer Bride up in North Carolina at Cat's Cradle, and they had a twang guitarist from Mississippi named Scott Goolsby with a pompadour and all that. And Goolsby was great. And I just thought, God, I wonder if I could do something with this guy. Well, Goolsby got a DUI for heroin in North Carolina, and he got sent back to Mississippi, but I found his number, and I called him up, and he was literally in his grandfather's silo playing his guitar when I called. And I said, I'm going to send you Boy and Dog, and I just want you to noodle around, because I think you're great. Just noodle around. And I set up a recording session in Starkville, Mississippi, and paid ahead of time. His grandfather had to drive him because he lost his license, And he sent me back these tracks, and they're just wonderful. But here's the thing. He accidentally had it in the same key as the Reich. So when it came in the door, I was like, oh, God, I can put these two together. So when you're watching the show, when you're watching Boy and Dog, there's a shot when the fire truck goes in the ditch, and we're filming the boy from behind. And you'll hear Goolsby's twang going like that, and then you'll hear the Reich going deep, 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 deep. I just love that so much, and it was just a happy accident. And while we're on it, and I'll shut up again, I gave myself the Crispy Critters line. That's me, and Larry's the fire chief running out of it. He had to shave his beard. He said fire chiefs can't have beards, so he's in the Boy and Dog show as a fire chief without his beard.
So I'll just say, one of the great things about this film is Larry, but it's also Gary's. This film blends documentary and fiction film, and if we did get academic, he made this before that was done a lot. Gary did. And Gary, putting things together that don't seem to belong, Larry really respected that. And Larry, Larry wrote with no rule book. He wrote with, no safety net. And this film structurally and having 3 short stories fictionalized and then a documentary. Is it a documentary? Is it fiction? In 2023, that's not as big a question, but when this was made, that was a much bigger question, and Gary was brilliant to go that way and to use that kind of music, and that's also a lasting part of this film.
Thank you, Tom. I want to say one more thing about Mary Annie's voice, because her voice is just absolutely amazing. I think you'll agree with me. she has the perfect film voice, and it's staccato, feels a little bit Irish, and there's some percussive stuff going on, and she'll say something like, babies, what was it you said? Babies, what your life was, get up, go to work, go to bed, babies. And while she's saying this, there's this percussion going, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. Right.
Well, while we're talking about the film, and tying this in with the archive, so thank you, Gary, for donating what you have related to the making of the film. Can you tell us a little bit about an unfortunate event regarding much of the film masters?
Yeah, I'll tell it, but I'm not gonna cry. I'll tell it quick. The guy who bankrolled the show also didn't pay his vault fee and
Storage fee. Film storage fee.
So there came a time when some people wanted to put a lot of money behind a 4K restoration, and came to find out that the vault, everything had been destroyed. And I called up the vault. I know, I've never felt so bad. I called the guy up and I said, surely you mean that you just put it somewhere unimportant? He goes, oh no, we destroyed it. And he said it with almost, pox on his house and pox on the guy. It was $5,000, and a lot of people would have just pulled out their checkbook and taken care of that. So I don't know I think it's a crime. There's nothing we can do about it. But we do have the show. The reason we have this show is because the film was sent to a festival, and they accidentally sent it back to me. My name and address was on something else. They sent it to the wrong place. They sent it to me, and so we have that master. But we won't ever get to see a beautiful 4K transfer unless somebody digs it up magically.
Yeah.
I keep thinking somebody's got it. But
well, the good thing is now it is in archives and special collections. All of the files are backed up redundantly. It will not be lost. So it's in good hands, and we thank you for that. So I'm realizing that the time is progressing. So I think why don't you, each of you, take some time to relate maybe your favorite Larry story, or you could talk about the film, whatever. Just some parting words for us before we take a short break and then get into the screening of the film.
I mean, I can get I mean, I don't know. I don't have a favorite. I did become so close to Larry that it's really hard to untangle, favorite stories from most important stories. I think that, Larry, the way Larry dealt with other people, the world around him, he was interested in everything that was authentic. He was interested in nothing that was inauthentic. In fact, he was kind of dismissive. And I had such respect for the clarity and honesty of how he moved through the world. I think I was looking back at an interview that we did early for Rankin magazine years ago, 1995, and two things. One, I asked him about Faulkner, because everybody has to ask anybody who grows up in Oxford about Faulkner. And he told the story of Gary Coleman. I'm sure that Paul knows this probably, but Gary Coleman, who he went to school with, cut two tips of his fingers off on a joiner planer saw and had to go to the hospital, and a bunch of guys wanted to take him something, so they pooled their money and bought a copy of Big Woods, Faulkner's Big Woods. And Larry said that was the first time he ever read Faulkner before he gave it to him. And he said if Gary Coleman hadn't cut his fingers off, he would never read Faulkner. And he didn't say it. I mean, it is funny, but he didn't say it with any humor at all. I mean, it was just a fact, right? And that relationship between, the injustice of real life and literature is so beautiful. And then the other thing I like, which he'd be saying to me right now, and I told Jim Dees this, we would sometimes drink beer. I'll admit, Larry and I would sometimes drink, and we'd be drinking beer all day long. And Larry would lean over at some point and he'd say, "Bro, I think it's time for a real drink." And that's kind of what I'm feeling right now.
I'll drink to that.
I got a bunch of stories, but I would like to say one thing though. Larry was pushing a book. He came through North Carolina, he swung through, and I said, well, let's just grab some breakfast. And we went to a Shoney's breakfast buffet as he was passing through town. And I had it in my head because I'd done the cruise show. It was a father-son show, and I had it in my head that he was going to talk about his father at some point. And we sat down and had a very long breakfast, and he told me all about his relationship with his father, which was not that good. And then he said, I'm not putting any of this in the show, and I'm not going to say anything about this for the show. It's going to be about something else. And that was, it's a story. There are stories I can't tell. You guys have seen Joe. All right, well, Gary Jones is Larry, and Wade's is the father. And so I think that's my most poignant Larry Brown story, the one I can't really tell. Okay, all right.
Before we end this up, I just want to say a few words. We're going to take a short pause here so that everybody can feel free to go get a drink at the bar. Yeah, get a real drink. Because this is not the polite South of Larry Brown. We're not pinkies out. It's not cotillion. So do go if you so choose. Get a drink. We're going to take about 5-6 minutes there, but just get some drink. And then we're going to have before the actual feature film, we're going to have a screening of some footage that Gary filmed. You're gonna love it. I'm not going to set it up for you. I'll just tell you it's some footage. It takes place here in Oxford. Stay tuned.
Rare.
Yeah.
The film is...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Everybody go get a refill, and then we'll reconvene here in just a few minutes for the film.